Welcome to a new episode of the Tolkien Experience podcast. I'm Sara Brown.
I'm Luke Shelton.
And I'm Sara Westvick.
Each episode we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guest to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
All of this is made possible by our supporters on Patreon, so we want to thank them and encourage you to check out the community at patreon.com/TolkienExperience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you. So without any more delay, let me introduce our guest. Hello everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Tolkien Experience podcast. And today I am immensely excited to reveal that our guest is none other than renowned Tolkien scholar and good friend of mine, Dr. Anna Smol. Welcome, Anna. Anna is a professor of English whose research and teaching interests are in Tolkien studies, medievalism and Old English literature. She's published on Tolkien in the Journal of Tolkien Research, Tolkien Studies, Modern Fiction Studies and Myth Lore, and various edited collections such as A Wilderness of Dragons, Essays in Honour of Verlin Flieger, Something Has Gone Crack, New Perspectives on J.R.R. Tolkien in the Great War, and The Body in Tolkien's Legendarium. She's a member of the editorial board of Malorn, the Journal of the Tolkien Society, and a principal investigator on a project on Tolkien and alliterative verse funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And she teaches at Mount Saint Vincent University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And you can find her on Twitter at Anna M. Smol or on her website and blog, A Single Leaf, at http://annasmol.net. Anna, welcome to the Tolkien podcast. We're so happy to have you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's thrilling to be here.
So you say you've actually watched a number of our podcasts before, so at least we know you're a fan.
Oh, absolutely. A fan and a patron.
Oh, wonderful. In that case, you are doubly welcome. So, Anna, you and I have known each other for a few years now, actually, haven't we? And we met through Tolkien studies because that's how people like us often tend to meet. But how were you first introduced to Tolkien's work?
Oh, that has to go way back, way before I met you. Now I'm going to reveal how old I am. This goes back to when I was in high school in the 1970s. And I was about probably 15, 16 years old. I don't remember exactly. And it was a time of counterculture, rebelliousness. That feeling was in the air of revolution. And so we had a new young English teacher. And he came into our classroom and said, we're going to throw out the prescribed reading of the school board. We don't need that kind of restriction. We're going to read Tolkien's The Hobbit instead. So to us, it was presented like this revolutionary move, which certainly had a very attractive aura, as did he at the time. And so that's when I first read Tolkien. The Hobbit. I read that, so I read it much older than most people do, but we liked it. I liked it. And then when I went to university, I mean, everybody was reading The Lord of the Rings, or at least that's how it felt. And then I read The Lord of the Rings as well. So that was my first introduction to Tolkien.
I love that idea of Tolkien as subversive literary material.
There are a lot of people today who would not agree with that. But that's how it was. That's how it was. That's how it seemed, anyway.
So you were reading it in high school, and you were reading it at university. But what about later on? Did you kind of leave it behind and then come back to it as an academic, or have you always been into Tolkien's work?
Tolkien was always part of my world because I was studying medieval literature. In those days, I've never heard of a course on Tolkien, and I don't think there were any, or many, if there were any, but I loved medieval literature. So Tolkien's part of that, his essay on Beowulf, his views on the Battle of Malden, his edition of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which was the standard edition with Evie Gordon for years and years. So Tolkien was a name that was always in my world, I guess, as I was working on medieval literature. And then when I got a job teaching, I was assigned a children's literature course, and so I put The Hobbit on it, of course. So Tolkien's always been there. But it's really only around the time I had no idea there was a fandom, or that there was there was a lot of scholarship on Tolkien. But around the time of the Peter Jackson movies, I got really interested in finding out more and started, digging and talking to people. And I realized, oh, there's a Tolkien fandom. There is such a thing. And there's Tolkien scholarship. There is such a thing. And I started reading more and more and, in depth. So that's when I first read the Silmarillion and other tales as well.
So you were a relative latecomer to the Silmarillion then?
Yeah, I'm a late bloomer. Given the length of my career, I'm a late bloomer. I'm near the end of my career, but some of I'm only just kind of like mid-career in Tolkien studies. Yeah.
Pardon me. I think you and I first met at Birmingham 2005. Would that be right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Was that one of the first times when you'd done a Tolkien Society event, or had you done one before that?
2004, I went to Marquette for their conference. And that's where I met people that I knew online, that I had met online. So I started, I was searching around the internet, and I found the onering.net, and I found their reading room. And at the time, the reading room, I don't go there now, so I don't know what it's like now. But at the time, the reading room was this fabulous place with people who were so into Tolkien and reading Tolkien so closely. We were reading The Lord of the Rings chapter by chapter, sometimes commenting on it paragraph by paragraph. And there are people there who were taking part who later became independent scholars, Tolkien scholars, reviewers, that I met online. So going to Marquette was a real thrill, because it's the first time I met people that I knew from online. And we had a little onering.net group that went to the Marquette University conference in 2004. And then in 2005, I went to Birmingham. Yeah.
And your paper there was kind of blurring the boundaries between Tolkien's work itself and the fandom within Tolkien, wasn't it, if I remember rightly?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it was based on was it a 2004 publication in Modern Fiction Studies?
Which I have on my shelf.
Oh, Frodo.
Yeah.
Readings of Male Intimacy in The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, that was my first article on Tolkien. And it was, when I think back, I thought, what was I doing? It was like I was trying to pour everything into one article that I had been thinking about and researching on the Lord of the Rings, World War I writers and World War I poetry, and then this new discovery for me, which was the fandom and fan fiction and slash fiction. And it all seemed to come together. So I was pouring it all into one article, which worked, I guess. And then my conference papers for a little while afterwards were mainly on Tolkien as a war writer and the kind of gender or the kind of sexuality that you might expect in, or that has been expressed and represented in World War I writers that I saw echoes of in The Lord of the Rings. So that's what I was first writing about. And fan fiction, to me, it's ridiculous that, again, I'm a late bloomer. So I discovered fan fiction pre-internet. I didn't even know that there were fan conventions or a Tolkien fandom. I mean, they never crossed my path, so how would I know? But in the internet, with the internet, it's easy to find things and find out things. So I, just Googling around and talking to people, and I discovered this thing called fan fiction, which I thought was marvelous because it is basically an adaptation of Tolkien's world and his characters in whatever way a person wants to go. But, teaching medieval literature, we're always teaching adaptations of previous texts. So it seemed like a very reasonable, rational thing, for people to do. And I thought, I want to comment on this, because I had only found, well, I had found sort of the classic books on fan fiction, and it has since developed in marvelous ways, the scholarship on fan fiction and so on. But at the time, I thought, well, I want to write about this because it all seems to fit somehow. So that was my work. Yeah.
Well, for any of our viewers or listeners who have any kind of interest on that intersection between Tolkien and fandom and that sort of idea, that article of yours, Oh, Frodo, that's in Modern Fiction Studies 2004, is absolutely excellent. And in fact, is quoted in my PhD thesis.
Oh.
And it's quoted in one of my early conference papers as well, because it was also an interest area of mine. But that was the first thing of yours I actually read, and have since I have read quite a lot of your writing, because I do think it's wonderful. And again, for any viewers or listeners out there, Anna's work is absolutely top notch. So do go and have a look.
Well, that was the first thing I ever wrote on Tolkien, and I think it was the best title I ever could think of.
Oh, I thought it was great.
I mean, I am quoting a fanfic writer when I'm saying, when I wrote Oh, Frodo, but I thought, oh, that's so perfect. Who did I quote? It was Eleanor Gardner.
Yes, a really prolific fan fiction writer at the time. Yeah, I remember their stuff. Oh, goodness, that really takes me back. It was such a wonderful conference, Tolkien 2005. I mean, particularly for someone like me, because I'm looking around seeing name tags going, oh my goodness, that's so-and-so. Oh my goodness, that's so-and-so. Fangirl flailing, that's so-and-so. So it was absolutely incredible. But I just remember sitting in the audience for your paper going, this is paradise.
Do you remember someone asking me, what would Tolkien think about? What do you think Tolkien would think of this?
Oh, yes. Yes, that question's never gone away, has it?
No, it hasn't.
No, and our answer hasn't gone away either, has it?
No, it's still the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, given that you've now written quite extensively on Tolkien, what's your favourite part of Tolkien's work? If you had to say, I like this bit, or this particular book, or this particular character, or anything, can you put your finger on the one, or is that just impossible?
The favorite changes all the time, and I think it changes with age too, because I remember when I was much younger, an undergraduate in university, I thought Éowyn saying, I am, revealing herself in the Battle of Pelennor Fields. I thought that was so marvelous, and I still do think it's great. It was a moment for, an ambitious young woman to identify with, I think. Later in life, I still love that bit, but there are other parts that attract me more, I think. And, well, it's no secret my OTP is Frodo Sam. So the climbing Mount Doom, I think that's just amazing, sad, heart-wrenching, emotional. But there's so many other bits that I like. I'm currently fascinated by the Notion Club papers. I feel like I have to somehow crack the Notion Club papers and understand it for myself. And every time I go into it, there's so many different ways in which it expands out. So I'm currently that's a favorite too. And I've written a lot about the homecoming of Beartneth, so that one has preoccupied me for a while. So it just the favorite changes, but it's always that. Probably the Lord of the Rings is at the core, and I think what I like about that is what did Tolkien say in one of his was it in On Fairy Stories that he talks about joy and sorrow as sharp as swords. And I think Lord of the Rings really captures that, both the joy and the sorrow, sharp as swords. I really like that description, and that's what I like about Lord of the Rings. So there are many episodes that you can look at that would fit that feeling, that description.
I like that idea of a favourite changing over time, because I think that's one of the things that keeps people coming back to The Lord of the Rings, or any of the texts actually, is because it speaks to you in a different way, depending on who you are and where you are in the moment in your life, doesn't it? And that's part of the joy of reading Tolkien, is that there's so many layers in it. It's like an onion. There's so many layers in it that, you know, a particular part of it will speak to you most strongly, depending on what's going on for you. That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and Lord of the Rings is capacious enough to allow that to happen. As most good literature is worth going back to more than once. And I think it stays with you. It can stay with you throughout your life in different stages of life and speak to you in different ways.
Yeah, I agree. Back to the Notion Club papers. I remember Verlyn Flieger saying at one conference that she's, if there's one disappointment that she has about Tolkien studies, is that so little has been written about the Notion Club papers. And she said that it must be almost 10 years ago. And here we are 10 years on. And still, there's very little written about the Notion Club papers. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's not set in Middle Earth. It doesn't have elves and hobbits. It's unusual for Tolkien, because you have this group of 20th century scholars, mainly writers, who are sitting together and they're just talking theory until something very strange happens. But there's a lot of talk and a lot of excitement about, look, I translated these lines and things like that wouldn't appeal to everybody. And it's not finished, so you're not quite sure where it's going. But the Notion Club papers, along with the earlier version, The Lost Road, it is intended to be a time travel story. So you think that might attract people a little bit more. What interests me is the use of Old English poetry in that Notion Club papers. And it's not just quotations of poems, but it's thinking with Old English poetry to create a prose narrative. And always there's that figure of Arundel that needs to be figured out, and I haven't quite figured out. And recently, Verlyn Flieger, our great scholarly role model,
goodness, yes,
has, she gave a talk, I think it was for the Tolkien Society, where she was suggesting that Tolkien never finished the story of Arundel, never wrote a complete version, and that was deliberate. And what does that mean? So I'm just taking that idea and trying to run with it. And, I feel like I owe very much to Verlyn Flieger, as we all do.
I'm going to say, name me a current Tolkien scholar that doesn't say something along those lines. But yeah, she is the ultimate, isn't she? Absolutely. Yeah, the Notion Club papers is kind of strange, as you say, because it isn't a Middle Earth text of any kind. But I just think that for anybody who really wants to delve into the workings of Tolkien's mind, it's an interesting side road to go down, and to see how his mind was, particularly at that time, how his mind was working and the sorts of things he was interested in. I mean, apart from the fact it does read a little bit like the world's weirdest faculty meeting, right? Yeah, but even so, there's enough in there to be really interesting, in the sense of, you read it and you think, what is going on here? And I think that in itself should be a bit of a draw for people. So I'd love to hear more people talking about the Notion Club papers, for sure.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Maybe. So apart from, your favorite bits of reading it, you've had a number of experiences through your academic life of working with Tolkien's work and meeting Tolkien scholars, and, all conferences and all this sort of thing, your own writing. Do you have a fondest experience that is linked to Tolkien's work in some way?
Well, lots of fond experiences. Again, it's hard to just pick one. I mean, fond experiences are going to conferences and meeting people, sitting, outside the tent at the University of Leeds and drinking mead, talking about Tolkien and going to Tolkien papers, and, or going to Kalamazoo and the dance at Kalamazoo and the papers at Kalamazoo and meeting people there. So all of that is a lot of fun, and I'm very fond of those. Well, right now they're memories because it couldn't go anywhere for quite a while. So hopefully we'll be able to go back to some of those things. But I guess if we're talking about my own kind of a solitary experience, it would be being able to look at the manuscripts, being at Marquette University and at the Bodleian and working with Tolkien's own manuscripts and seeing. I've worked with the Homecoming manuscripts, and so reading through them, seeing his corrections, looking at his notes. Reading his unpublished lectures that he gave just has been just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And at Marquette, I went there, and at the time I was working on Tolkien as an artist, Tolkien as a writer and an artist. And there, the archivist Bill Fliss let me look at a manuscript page. Now, he handled it. He didn't let me touch it, and it was all protected. Because at Marquette, you're supposed to, well, I think they've digitized these, you're supposed to look at copies of the manuscripts. But he brought out this one page, which was the drawing of the Tower of Cirith so that I could look at the pen and pencil markings and really look at them. So that was thrilling just to see the real drawing. Of course, we've been able to look at this now in the Bodleian, New York, French Tolkien exhibition. So they've made the manuscript pages available, or some of them, in those exhibitions. But at the time, that was thrilling. And it is just thrilling to be able to go to the Bodleian, walk around the streets where Tolkien lived and worked. I always stay at a B&B that's right around the corner from his house on Northmoor Road. Mm-hmm. And it's mentioned in the Notion Club papers. The address is mentioned, so I have to stay there, right? And looking at them and being able to handle the manuscripts and read Tolkien's own writing in his notes. That's pretty amazing. I've been very lucky to be able to do that.
I must admit, Marquette is on my bucket list. That's something I would love to do, that just to see what they have there in person would be incredible. And I know what you mean by it being an amazing experience to do these sort of things. I was also lucky enough to work with Tolkien's papers at the Bodleian when I was completing my PhD. And what I wasn't expecting was the first time I picked up a piece of paper, because you can actually handle a lot of that stuff in there. Picked up a piece of paper, it was about this big. And it was just a series of notes about the Black Riders. And I picked this up and I almost had a visceral emotional reaction. This piece of paper is not just a piece of paper. He owned this piece of paper. He held this piece of paper. He wrote on this piece of paper. It was just this incredible moment where I thought, oh my goodness, this was his. And I'm holding it.
Yeah.
Yes. I in my pocket and run out of it, which is a bit of a shame. But it was an amazing, amazing moment. And there's no feeling quite like it. The privilege of being able to do that is amazing. So, I completely understand your response.
Marquette is planning a new exhibition of manuscripts.
I know. I don't know what international travel is going to be like, and I don't know what the money situation will be like. And yes, it's not like I know anybody who lives anywhere near Marquette either, so it would be a whole deal of. But I would love to. Who wouldn't want to go and see that stuff? Being people. Are you planning to go see
so many fanzines, fan materials as well? So if you're interested in fandom, they've got the collection, I think.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Are you planning a trip down to look at the new exhibition? It's a long way from Mount Saint Vincent.
I'm not planning anything for any time soon because I feel like we just have no idea if we can go any. And frankly, I haven't been in the States since 2016, so.
Yeah, I'm just fingers crossed still for Leeds for 2022. Yeah. And anything past that would just be a cherry on the top, I think. I
think so. But, Leeds is already saying they might have a hybrid conference. And so they're a little concerned as well about. Yeah. Although, people, online attendance does open up a conference far more easily to other people who can't afford to go. And that's not a bad thing.
No, I agree. Actually, if there's one good thing that's come out of all of this, it's that conferences are now far more likely to entertain the idea of being hybrid throughout the future. And I think that's really good because so many people can't afford to attend conferences, and not just people who live in different countries, even people within the same country but don't have the money to travel to somewhere and stay somewhere because it's not cheap, even within the same country, and it widens access in such a good way, and I would love to see that continue in perpetuity. I don't think anyone's going to lose by that, really.
No, I think it's a great idea. I think the more we show people what we do, or allow other academics to take part who can't afford it, and there are that's a great idea. That's good.
Are you saying that academics are not rich people, Anna?
Not everyone is. I'm in a very privileged position, but others are not. And there isn't a lot of money necessarily for travel or any money for research.
Yeah, having that hybrid idea makes things a little bit more equal because obviously the cost of attending online is usually much, much less. And then, I mean, that's just for the conference fee. And then if you don't have to add in the travel fees and the accommodation fees and all that sort of thing, it does mean, I think, that there'll be a far wider audience able to attend. And I just think that's a win-win. So, yes, absolutely.
And the open access journals, too. So I think that's important.
Yes.
So Mount Journal of Tolkien Research, Mythlore, these are all good moves to make them open access.
Absolutely, because actually I've been an independent scholar since I completed my PhD, and the cost of purchasing scholarly material is incredibly high, and shockingly high, I would say. Actually, considering that those people who actually write the articles don't tend to get rich off that. It's the publishers.
You write them for free, and then the company or whoever owns the journal makes the money. It's a crazy system, but I think it's important to say, if anybody's listening who would like an article that they can't have access to, you should just write to the author, because most of the time we're very happy to send a copy for free to anyone who needs a copy of our work. I mean, we're writing it so that we want people to read it. I think most times you would get a favorable response if you need a copy of something.
That's actually a really, really good point, because I did that myself while I was doing my PhD. I did indeed write off to a few authors and asked if it was possible to have a PDF copy of their work. And every single person I wrote to sent me a PDF copy and wished me well. So yes, so I would agree.
Someone wants to read our work.
Yay, have one. Do you want another one?
Somebody knows wants to read it. Here you go. I'll send you 3 other things as well.
Well, exactly, because that's the currency that we as academics get, isn't it? It's people reading the work and talking about our work, and then maybe even quoting it in their own work. That's the real currency of it. It certainly isn't dollar. You don't get any money for it at all. But
money.
Yeah, but the idea of somebody actually having that level of interest in your work and wanting to read it. I've had a few people email me and ask if they can read my conference papers, and I've merrily emailed copies out. Why not?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so we're still talking about, your academic work to do with Tolkien and all that sort of thing. And you've talked about how you started off looking at that intersection between Tolkien's work and fandom, and you've done a lot of work that crosses the boundaries between your medieval studies and Tolkien's work, like Beorhtnoth, for example. Would you say that your approach to your academic scholarship to do with Tolkien has changed over time then?
Right. Oh, that's a good question. I guess medievalism is the thread that runs through it all. That is some adaptation or recreation or reception of medieval literature by later authors. So you could call Tolkien a medievalist author, even though, and that doesn't mean that he's back in the Middle Ages. It means he's writing in the 20th century. He's a modern writer, but he's using medieval techniques or themes or ideas, and he's remaking them. He's reworking them. And then, as I said, fanfic writers are remaking, reworking, transforming their sources as well in the same way, I think. And so when I get to my most recent work on alliterative meter in The Homecoming of Beorhtnoth, which is, a study of the Old English poetic style that Tolkien uses in The Homecoming of Beorhtnoth, I'm still studying kind of a medievalist fiction that is sort of reworking or transforming the Old English poem, The Battle of Maldon, and an Old English poetic style to say something new and to do something new in the 20th century for Tolkien as a modern writer. So maybe that's the sort of thread that runs through all my work on Tolkien, and that goes beyond, previous to my work on Tolkien. But it just goes in so many different avenues, so many different, so many different paths open up. You start looking at one text of Tolkien's, and then you think, okay, well, I've got that idea. I'm going to write that up. That'll be done. And then no, as you're writing that up, something else comes up, and then something else. And I gave, I think, 3 conference papers on The Homecoming of Beorhtnoth this spring and summer, and I still have more ideas on that 350-line verse drama as a result of the previous work. Like, it just keeps opening up and opening up. So who knows? I don't know where it will lead. I hope I know where it'll lead, because I have a big project in mind on Tolkien's alliterative verse. But it's there's so much that the evolution may look like, where is she going now? She's talking about Lord of the Rings, and now she's in Homecoming, and there she's talking about Notion Club papers, but hopefully it'll all come together in some way around that core of medievalism, I guess, which is very broad, very general, but that's the best way I guess I can explain it. Otherwise, I just look haphazard. I'm going all over the place. Whatever strikes me.
There is this core idea that's pulling it all together in the end.
Yeah. Hopefully.
So, away from Anna the scholar and back to Anna the reader of Tolkien, what about Tolkien's work might make you recommend it to somebody who hasn't read it before?
I would be very careful about recommending it unless people seem to want a recommendation for something to read, and they seemed receptive to a work like The Lord of the Rings. Because, in the first excitement of discovery, all kinds of things, I tried to push the work on other people. Like, you've got to read this. But if they're not into it, or if they feel embarrassed about reading something like The Lord of the Rings, with some old ideas about it being juvenile or whatever, there's no point in trying to convince them. So if somebody asked me for a recommendation, and then I could say, well, if you're interested in this kind of work, here's something for you. Or if they asked me for a recommendation for a young reader, a child, I would very happily recommend The Hobbit. But otherwise, I'd wait to see if they were sort of receptive to a work like The Lord of the Rings. And I would recommend starting with that, I think.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anna, it's been lovely to talk to you. It really has been a joy to see you, especially as I haven't seen you in person for far too long. So it's been lovely to have this opportunity.
Yeah. We'll hope for next year that we can meet in person again.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
That would be really good. Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, Anna Smol, for joining us on the Tolkien Experience podcast. And I hope you've enjoyed this particular podcast, everybody. Thank you very much for listening.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share the Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We really enjoy making these podcasts, and the fun doesn't stop here.
That's right, it continues on social media. You can find us on Facebook as Tolkien Experience and Twitter as @TolkienEXP. Don't forget to like, follow, share and comment because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking to our guests.
For even more content and to join our fellowship of supporters, check out our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Tolkien Experience. Finally, you can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I'm @Luke B. Shelton.
I'm @SR Westvic.
And I'm @Aaron L. Palmadill. If you have questions or comments, you can send them to us by email at tolkienexperience@gmail.com.
If you want to know more about this week's guest, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to it.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, and we truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.